Renaissance Capital has launched its South Africa operations, this in a drive to lead the firm's expansion into the continent's largest economy. Here to talk us through the group's strategy on the continent and the motivations behind their venture is Clifford, CEO of South Africa and head of the Pan-African Equities Division over at RenCap. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Clifford.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have RenCap using now South Africa, the South African operation as a conduit for South African companies who want to invest in the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. Why now, where Renaissance Capital has a franchise spanning the region, including fully fledged offices in 5 countries already?
I think the strategy, Alicia, was to build out in the geographies where the traditional bulge bracket banks decided not to go early on, and to build up a credible equity business and platform and some revenue base, which I think RenCap's done very successfully in the 5 geographies that you alluded to a few moments ago. But I think RenCap are cognizant of the fact that to really lay down a credible, meaningful Pan-African footprint, South Africa has to be part of that.
Yeah.
As do a bunch of other geographies as well, but certainly I think we have to be part of that. So, I think that's why now.
What are your goals then in terms of market share against the likes of JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, your former employers, Deutsche Bank? I mean, surely it is going to be a tough baptism. So what are you targeting in terms of market share in the areas you're focusing on?
Okay, I think that's a good question, and one that we've obviously been asked a lot over the last couple of weeks. We aim not to play in quite the same space as, let's call them the bulge bracket banks. This is going to be a niched offering. It's going to be niched in a couple of ways, and it's going to be something a little unusual and different to what I think exists right now. The strengths of the RenCap platform from a research perspective currently are mining, which includes oil and gas, financial services, telcos. We're going to pretty much niche ourselves around those, although it will be reasonably fluid around that. And why that? Renaissance has a particular strength in EMEA and Russia around those sorts of sectors. So the analysts that we're going to employ are going to have an opportunity to plug themselves into this very, very powerful RenCap research product. I don't know whether you saw the II ratings a couple of days ago, but Renaissance competed, I think, in 10 categories, and I think came first in 10. Yeah. So again, I think the team that we end up hiring here are going to have an opportunity to really work.
So that basically then your leverage into what is a very mature market right now. Okay, let's move forward. I mean, opportunities you're seeing in Africa. Let's look first of all on the capital market side of things. We know that most markets are still developing on the continent. So what opportunities are you boasting in terms of South African operations and investors wanting to look abroad into the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa? Okay,
so again, what are we building in South Africa? We are going to build a research-driven, client-centric platform in South Africa. We are going to offer clients coverage again along the lines I've described, along that niched sort of area. But it's going to be very much a Pan-African offering. So we're going to offer clients, and again, who are these clients? These are clients, both institutional clients in South Africa, as well as in international geographies that we tend to trade with anyway. And they're going to be offered a South African and Pan-African equity offering, essentially in country, in every geography in which we have a presence.
Yeah. Well, looking on the M&A side of things, I mean, one would assume you're sitting with most of your acquiring potential sitting here in South Africa. I mean, which sectors do you see providing most opportunities, considering that we're seeing the likes of MTN and most of our major 4 banks as well looking at extending their African footprint?
Yeah. So again, I think our offering plays quite nicely to that.
Yeah.
The South African space, from an M&A perspective, is extremely competitive. Lots of international and local banks chasing, I think, a very few interesting mandates. We again, I think, will have one of the only credible equity footprints across the continent, and that footprint we think is going to be one that will support the M&A space very, very nicely. So to your question on companies like MTN or Shoprite, whoever wants to put a footprint out into Africa, what we hope to offer is a credible on-the-ground, in-country presence. across the continent.
Well, if we get a little bit more specific, I mean, the hot topic at the moment is the opportunity that the Nigerian banking sector presents at the moment. What's your view on the investment potential that sits in that country within the financial arena?
Look, I think I'm not an expert on financial services in Nigeria, but there is a lot of consolidation, a lot of legislation pending in Nigeria. There's going to be a huge amount of M&A activity in Nigeria. I think both from an in-country perspective, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of investment opportunity from outside the country. So again, we think having a presence here and being able to hook up the corporate banking space in South Africa with what's going on in Nigeria will be an interesting
Well, of course, we're waiting with bated breath on this end, because we've seen many expressions of interest being directed that way. In the meantime, you've also got operations in Zimbabwe. I mean, major issues in that country at the moment surround nationalization, also the possible unraveling of the unity government there, where even SADC has been called to possibly step in. What investment opportunity are you flagging in that territory?
You know, I think, again, Zimbabwe is a country in which a lot of investors and certainly banks fear to tread. We have a very significant presence in Zimbabwe. I think that we're reasonably well plugged into most of the corporate and institutional players in the country. As to where Zimbabwe is going to go or how soon it's going to get there, I probably know less than you, frankly.
Big question marks around that. I mean, what kind of challenges then does that present? You're actually getting buy-in to investment opportunities there.
Well, we've had a reasonable amount of success in Zimbabwe. I think if this goes somewhere to answering your question, we've had a fair amount of international investor interest, which is translated into investment. These investors have made a lot of money in Zimbabwe over the last 18 months or so. I mean, again, I think bear in mind I've been here with this company 10 days. So, I'm not going to really speak with a huge amount of credibility as to what's happened over the last 18 months on the platform. But from what I understand, there's been a fair amount of investment over the last 12 to 18 months in Zimbabwe, and successful investment in the equity space.
Yep. Well, you're certainly entering the South African arena at a very interesting time when the whole nationalization debate has cropped up here in South Africa as well. Surely that must be scaring foreign investors somewhat, including yourselves, or not quite?
No. South Africa, certainly for me, and I think for RentCap, is a space or a market which we are very, very comfortable with. RentCap is a bank that is comfortable to play in frontier markets. I think South Africa has lots of the opportunities of some of the frontier markets without quite a few of the risks. I mean, I think this is a very, in many ways, a very developed market that frankly presents us from an equity perspective with a very, very interesting opportunity without a lot of the risks.
Well,